if you are making a portfolio where you are buying cheap stocks and then selling them when they become fairly valued, buying more cheap stocks, selling them when they're fairly valued, then yeah, once a stock is out of your screener, if you have something better to replace it, then that's probably what you should do. And that can work for you very well over very short time periods. And on the other hand, if you're buying stocks that you're looking to hold for decades, that might not be the best way to go. And so I think when you look at trying to buy good businesses over the very long term, what looks cheap to you might not look cheap from a numbers basis necessarily compared to everything else, but it could still be a good price. And at that point, if you're really in as a business owner for the long term, it doesn't matter and it should not matter to you what the price is in the market because you know this is something that you want to hold for decades. And so, maybe before we lose people who just started to tune in today, what's a stock screener? A stock screener is something where you can put different metrics in and it will filter a group of stocks with that criteria. So if I want to take like a very simple like price to earnings ratio, which is one of the most common ratios that's used to approximate a price or valuation for a stock, you can use a screener to say, hey, show me only price to earnings ratios below 10 or below 15. And so you can get a list of a lot of the statistically cheap stocks in the market. And so when you're doing that, you'll find a lot of these stocks that get temporarily beaten up and out of favor, but you also find a lot of stocks that might not have great businesses underneath them. And that's why they are cheap. And so, while Wall Street is emotional, it's also not dumb. And so a lot of times something could look too good to be true. And so you have to be careful with that. When you have positions in your portfolio and you look at them and they've gone up in price, the question does become what, you want to look at the companies and think about, are these companies I can really see myself in for the long term? And so, when I try to think about what kind of a company does that, it's really going to be companies that can take your money and put it to good use. And so whether that's them giving it back in a dividend or through buybacks, or whether that's them reinvesting in themselves and being able to grow and compound, those are the things that you want to look for. And those show up in the numbers. And the answer to whether a stock is a good business, I think, is a separate question from whether it's still cheap or not. And it's an important distinction, but something that I think people should take into account.
I agree with all that. And I think a really good way to think about that is when you're looking at companies to screen and you're looking to invest in them, using the stock screener is obviously a great way to help you narrow down your choices, because when you just start looking at the vast universe of companies that are available to buy, it's a lot. It's not tens of thousands in the United States, but it's, thousands. And so it can be overwhelming. So using a screener to help you narrow down those choices is a great tool. One of the things that I think about, and Andrew and I have talked about this in the past as well for him, and I do this the same way, is when you're thinking about whether the company is, whether you want to keep buying it, holding it, or whether you want to sell it, a great question to ask yourself is, has anything fundamentally changed about the company? In that, is it something that they've stopped making whatever it is they're making? Have management completely turned over? Is the product or service that they offer completely become unrelevant? Perfect example, Kodak. Kodak was the king for a long, long time. And then these little cell phone things came out, and then all of a sudden digital photographs were the thing. And the old analog type of taking pictures and processing film, that just kind of died a horrible death. And Kodak didn't adapt, and they got caught flat-footed, and boom, they're not out of business, but they're certainly not relevant. And at one point they were one of the largest companies in the market. And now they're, I don't know what their market cap is, but it's quite small. anyway, that's a perfect example of a company that something fundamentally changed. The universe in which they existed fundamentally changed, and so we needed to sell out of that company. You could look at some of the oil majors today and wonder, is something going on that would cause you to fund that would cause them to fundamentally change, and that they either need to adapt or they're going to die. It could happen. I don't know. It could take a while, but it's certainly something to consider if you're going to buy a Exxon or a Chevron. But the flip side of that is, like Andrew was saying, if you screen right now, you might see some of those companies and they'll be cheap. And you think, oh God, this is great. A, a 5 star or a blue chip type company like a Chevron or an Exxon is trading at the super low PE. This might be a great time to buy in, but you have to ask that extra question. Why is this so cheap? Why is this company that was so awesome 5 years ago, 10 years ago, now so cheap? What's happened? And so those are some of the questions that you need to ask beyond just looking at the numbers. And obviously looking at the numbers are great, and the numbers tell you a story. And a low PE for a company like Chevron or Exxon is telling you a story, just like a high PE for a company like Adobe or Facebook is telling you another story. And our job is to try to figure out how to decipher what those stories are. And that's what makes investing interesting and fun and a challenge, because it's not easy to pick up that book and figure out what it's trying to tell you. You have to sometimes think a little bit between the lines. And so I guess my thought is, for Dan's great question, is when you're looking at the stock screener and a company moves out of it, in some cases, that's actually a good thing, is because the company is improving its metrics and the market is starting to recognize, hey, this is a really good company, and they're starting to bid the price up. And so your shares that you bought at a cheaper price are now worth more. And so I guess it's your decision then, is trying to decide whether you want to continue to hang on to that company, or whether you want to take the gains and try to find another cheaper company and try to work that up. Really, there's no right or wrong answer to that. That really comes down to your personal preference and how much you want to do. Sometimes you do want to move on to another company because it's more interesting and it keeps you challenged. But I also challenge you to think of this. Charlie Munger said once that the greatest challenge to compounding is not interrupting it unnecessarily. And so if you got a great company that you've bought really cheap and it's going through the roof, then sometimes it's best to just step away and get out of the way and let the thing do its thing.